All right. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my lecture recital. This is going to be a hybrid mode recital where there are a few people here in the community, and I also have friends on Zoom watching this. And the first part of the recital will be just verbal lectures with the slideshows. And so for those who are on Zoom, you will have a very good experience because you will see the slides. I share the screen very clear. The slides here, the screen here is a little bit small if you can't see it. I also have the handout for you who are in community. Some of the slides, especially some of the music examples, I put it on the handout so you can see that. But for the second part of the recital is the performance part, and it's reversed. So for those who are in person here, you will have a very good experience listening to live music. But I will also do YouTube live stream to live stream my performance part. I will send out the link after my lecture part, and you can click on that and watch live stream performance for that. The experience is less better than in person, but at least you got to hear me play. Okay, all right, let's get started. So my lecture recital is entitled The Geocultural Differences of Southern and Northern China in Creating the Diverse Modern Chinese Compositions, featuring a brief insight into two Chinese modern compositions. And they are the impromptu Village Drum Tower of the Dong People, composed by Mr. Xiangping Zhou in 1987, and the Instant Moment of Beijing Opera, composed by Mr. Chen in 2000. So Mr. Xiangping Zhou and Mr. Chen, they are both well-known and leading composers in China and have both contributed to Chinese new music in the 20th and 21st century. They combine both the Western modern compositional techniques with traditional Chinese music elements, promoting the Chinese new music worldwide. The impromptu and the Beijing opera piece are two outstanding examples of this combination. Although these two pieces both represent Chinese new music, they also differ from each other due to the fact that they are coming from the different regional, cultural, and geographic backgrounds in China. As a result, the two pieces differ and contrast in multiple ways in reflection of the geocultural differences between the southern and the northern China. So today in my lecture recital, I'll be talking about the following aspects. Number one, the geocultural differences in between the South and the North China. Number two, some general facts about both the composers and the pieces. Number three, that's the major part of my lecture today. It's compare and contrast the two pieces through analytical approaches and how they are influenced or shaped by the geocultural differences. The analytical approach will include form analysis, scale examination, harmonic language exploration, and storyline behind it. And then I will briefly talk about the connections and the unity of the two pieces and their more profound meanings to the Chinese new music in the future. And finally, I will perform both pieces with a slide show in the background to guide you the storyline of the piece. All right, let's get started with the critical question of today. What is the South and what is the North? So in order talking about the South and the North, you see that I show you a map of China. That's a geographic map. And so you see I draw a red line in the middle. And that line is the geographic borderlines of the South and the North, in which the west part is the huge mountain called Chen, and the east side of that line is the long river called Huai. So the Qing Mountain and the Huai River line is the geographic borderlines in China to divide the China mainland into the north part and the south part, okay? So what is the differences in between the north and the south? Because of the a lot of like diverse aspects of the north and the south, including living style, food, climate change, or the geographic shape. So the north and the south has a very diverse living and culture environment. Let's take a look at some of them. The first difference is the geographic shape. As you can see, the left side is the south, the right side is the north. In the left side, you see that the south part has a lot of mountains, like mountain areas, a lot of them. And the north part, it's mostly flat land, the plain. So one of the consequences for this is that the north part, back in ancient China, always has more communications than the south part because of the travel restrictions in the mountains, and then it's just easier to travel on the flat land. So the north side sometimes like develops faster because they have a faster speed of communication with each other, and their culture are more like unified. So you have one thing and you travel for like 200 miles, still the same thing. But however, in the south, you have one thing, you have a song. In this style, you travel 20 miles and it's a total different style. So it's a mixture of different styles. That's the geographic differences. The second difference is about climate. Just think about Rochester and Miami. So you will suddenly realize the difference. In the winter, especially, well, that you can see which one is the south, which one is the north. And what the result of this is that people tend to have more outdoor activities in the south than in the north. And thus, which could influence the art form. So for the south, we have a lot of folk songs or mountain folk songs. People, they are doing labors in the field and they sing songs, and they walk on the street to sing songs. While in the north, people really go out in the winter. Like we don't play outdoor recitals like in December. So that would just kill the performer. And so we have more like a stage art. So like people are indoors, we have a recital hall and people gather around and then listen to the recital. That's the shape of form of art that's kind of different. The next aspect is people's life. Because the north side has a faster speed of communication, which also means for the authorities, it's easier to control. So you can send the troops to anywhere within short of amount of time. Unlike in the south, it's hard. If you want to send troops to one place, it takes 3-4 months, and everything has changed when the troops arrive. So historically, like the south have more civilian people living there, like normal people enjoying normal life there, while the north are mostly for the royal families to settle down. So as a result, the life atmosphere in the south is a little bit more free than the north atmosphere, living atmosphere. Okay, now the last aspect of the differences between the south and the north is that because of that royal family thing, so royal families and the authorities, they live in the north, while normal people, civilians, they live in the south. It also influenced the architecture style. So if you take a look at the right side picture, or left, whatever. So that's a building from the south, and that red, yellow one is the Forbidden City from Beijing, from the north. You can just get a sense, get a feeling from these two pictures, like the buildings in the south are more for people to live in, like to enjoy or for design, but the buildings in the north are kind of a symbol for authority. So look at the color they use, the yellow, the red, and the shape and the size of the building. It stands for authority, for the royalty of the rulers of the country. So as I said, the building style comparing the south and the north is beauty versus solemnity. So, and we will use this in analyzing the pieces. So why does it matter? Does it matter to talk about these differences? First of all, the geocultural differences have shaped the diverse characteristics of the art forms, like singing, painting, drama, and the southern and northern China, they have different shapes or different styles of arts, and that's caused by this north and south differences. On the other hand, knowing these differences will help us receive a better perception of the art, and particularly in today's case, the music we're going to play. So from the music from the two different regions of China. So talking about that, then let's move to the two pieces. The two pieces I'm going to present today, the first one is called the Village Drum Tower of the Dong people, and the second one is the Instant Moment of Beijing Opera. To start with, the first piece, or I would just call it the Drum Tower piece. It's a shorter name. The Drum Tower piece is a piece describing the life in a southern Chinese mountain village. And you can see from the picture over there, the first picture on top, and that's the small village. And what is Dong people? So Dong is one of the 55 minorities in China. So we have Han people, we have other majorities and minorities. So Dong is one of the 55 minorities in China, and they look like that. All right. And then what is the drum tower? So drum tower is a tall building. It's the tallest building in the village. It was used for defensive purpose in the ancient times. So the guard can stand really high, and if they see the enemy, they will play the drums in the building to warn the village people to get ready for that. But nowadays, there's no such threat. So it becomes a ritual or ceremony facility, like for carnivals or celebrations of events. And impromptu, why is it is called impromptu? And you will feel that when I play it, it feels very fragmental. As the composer himself described, quote, it is his personal emotion with instant fantasy, quote. So that's his own word to describe why it is impromptu, because he said when he was in the village, when he composed this piece, like there are so many different things. Like I said, in the South, you travel 20 miles, it's a totally different story, different scene. So everything like combined together, like making me like, oh my gosh, this is this, that. So many beautiful and fascinating things that amazed him. So that's about this piece. Then about the other piece, Beijing Opera. So Beijing Opera, as you can see from the title, it's Instant Moments of Beijing Opera. So when you know a little bit about Beijing Opera, so Beijing Opera is an art form. It's just like a Western classical opera, but it's a traditional Chinese opera where we have people singing, also singing, acting, and dressing costumes like that, and perform on stage. So it usually includes 4 scenes: the singing scene, the speech, the dancing, and the fighting scene. And these 4 scenes are all represented or demonstrated in the piece I'll be playing. And I will give you a clue where that is in the slides when I play it. Also, the other important aspect you need to know about this piece is that one of the instruments to accompany Beijing Opera and is those like plucked string instruments. Of course, we have string instruments like the hu, qing, and we also have little drums. But this one I pointed out because it's associated to our piece. So this is called pipa. It looks like that, and it has some strings, 4 strings. Yeah. So we have 4 notes as the tuning strings. So we'll talk about the tuning later as well. And the last aspect you need to know about Beijing Opera is the scale. So Beijing Opera uses the traditional Chinese pentatonic scale, but with an alternation. The note, what we call it, is bianzhi. So bianzhi is a sharp 4th. If this is a pentatonic scale, and bianzhi is F sharp. So that's the symbolic note. The sharp 4 is the symbolic note for Beijing Opera, and it exists in the melody of the Beijing Opera music. So once you hear that, you can recognize it. Okay, now this is Beijing Opera. So this is a stylistic note for Beijing Opera. The sharp 4th, also named bianzhi. Okay, to give you a better idea of what Beijing Opera sounds like and looks like, I have a little clip here. So hope you can enjoy. Oops. Let's see if it's working. Yes. Let's go to the sound is not okay. You can just hear through my laptop. So those are the characters. So that's about Beijing Opera. Now, after the piece, let's talk about the two people, the two most important people for today, the two composers. As you can see, they were both born in 1951, so they're in the same age. And about Mr. Zhou, so Mr. Zhou was a native of Chengdu in Sichuan province, which is also my hometown. So I know him personally. And actually, if you see the first page of my handout, I say special thanks also to him because he has helped me a lot in discussing about his own piece. And it gives me a lot of inspirations in talking about that. So he studied composition at Sichuan Conservatory of Music. And then his studies were interrupted by the Cultural Revolution in 1966. So after the Cultural Revolution, he went back to school and finished his master's degrees at around 1978. And he became a composition faculty at the Sichuan Conservatory from 1980. He got his major influence, one of his major influence was from his father. So his father, Mr. Lu Zhou, is also a composer, and he was one of the four leading composers back in the 50s in China. Mr. Zhou was chosen to study by the government of China in the Soviet Union as one of the four outstanding composers in China back in that time. So he spent 4 years from 1951 to 1955 studying in Moscow Conservatory with Professor Sergei Balasanyan. And might not heard of this name. Okay, so and maybe so like me, Mr. Zhou, I'm talking about his son, this composer. So he also learned a lot from his father, so he might have an influence on the Russian tradition as well. And Mr. Zhou is currently one of the most influential Chinese composers in promoting the Southern China musical and the cultural elements to the world. That's about Mr. Zhou. And Mr. Chen. So Mr. Chen was born in Shanghai, and he studied composition and clarinet at Central Conservatory of Music. He went to France in 1984, also chosen by the government, and he got a scholarship, and the government sent him to France to study for free. And he was lucky to have met his most important and influential teacher, the Oliver Messiaen, and finally became one of his last students. And he studied with Messiaen for a couple of years, and during which he expanded his musical language to the contemporary realm. So he is one of the most influential Chinese composer in melting the traditional Chinese musical elements into the 20th and 21st century compositional techniques. Perhaps one of his best known work is not his classical music compositions, but is his composition for the 2008 Beijing Olympic song, You and Me. That was him. He composed the Beijing Olympic song in 2008. So after the two pieces and the two composers, let's move to our main part of the presentation. In talking about the analytical views of the two pieces, I will go through four things in my presentation: the formal structure of the pieces, the choice of scale, the choice of harmonic language, and the storyline behind the notes. Let's begin with the formal structure. So I'll be presenting and demonstrating a lot on the piano. And if you can't see the examples on the slide, you could turn to your handout. I have all the examples printed out in the handout. So in general, the Zhou piece, the drum tower piece, is a three-part form piece. You have an A section, you have a B section, you have an A prime section. But unlike a traditional rounded binary, each section is composed out of so many or different distinguished dance characters. So like a sonata form, you have the first theme, you have the transition, you have the second theme. But for the Zhou piece, in the A section, you have dance character A, B, C, D, and then in the B section you have E and F. And why I call it the third section A prime, even though it doesn't sound like a recapitulation, but it uses those characters in the A section, like A, C, D, or A, B, C, in different combinations. You might not be able to recognize it when I play the A prime section and to associate with the A section, but if you know these dance characters, you'll hear it. So let me go through those dance characters and also to introduce you the piece. So the piece starts with an introduction. With this, the introduction is with two contrasting gestures, one lazy one, one more active. So that's the opening of the piece, and the whole introduction is switching between these two gestures. And the second example is in the A section, dance A character. So that's the A character, remember that? That's for the A section, A dance character. And then for the A section, B dance character is more active. And you also introduce the bass drum. That's the drum. That's why I call it drum tower. So the drum comes in the dance character B. Now, dance character 3 is kind of mysterious right hand with the left hand melody. Something like that. And all those things will come back in the A prime section. And then dance character 4 or D is this the major character of the piece. It's I would call that's the major character or major theme of the piece. So it show up most frequently in the piece. And so as a summary, the A section uses dance character A, B, C, D in the order of A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, C. It is very abstract to talk about this like that, but when I play it, you will try, maybe you can try to follow with the score, yeah, on the back of your handout. So then let's move to the B section of the piece, where we have dance character E and F. So it's a lyrical duet in the B section. So this is the dance character E. It's very lyrical, and he is contrasting with the nature sound, with what I call dance character F. So he's kind of imitating the nature sound here. So those are the nature sound, which I call it dance character F. As a result, the B section only has two contrasting dance character E, F, E, F, E, F. Whereas in the A prime section, I will not demonstrate, but the A prime section has the same dance character, but just programmed in a different order or in a different appearance, but it's still the same character. Also, he uses A, C, D in the different orders. Okay, let's move on. Now, let's move to the Beijing Opera, the other piece. Unlike those pieces, the Beijing Opera piece is in variation form. So because the opera, like even for Western opera, you have different acts, you have different scenes. So variation form works better for this. You present different scenes, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and variation 1, variation 2, and 3. So each variation represented a different scene in the Beijing opera. So also, like if you imagine, or if you're familiar with those like operatic form, you see that each scene or each act is always introduced by a purely instrumental, like prelude or introduction or something like that. So which is also the case in this piece. Before each variations, Mr. Chen has inserted a little transition. So I view this transition as little instrumental interlude or prelude for the next section. Okay, unlike Mr. Zhou, Mr. Chen uses only two motivically related themes and their varied forms throughout the whole piece. First of all, it's a variation, so you cannot use a lot of materials. You cannot have 5 different characters and varied on all 5 of them. That would be too long, the piece. And so he has one theme and he has a counter theme, what he called. So I'll show you in just a minute. It looks pretty similar, but in different directions. And he varied based on this 2 theme. So here it is. That's the opening. I will just play the second presentation of the theme. It's because it's more complete. So that's the theme for the Beijing opera piece, and throughout the whole piece, it sounds like the same. So this is the theme 1, and this is theme 2. Sorry. That's the theme 2. So these two themes, they battle with each other a lot during the piece. Okay, and now let's go through real quick each of the variations. So this is the first variation. I call it a speech scene, and it's fast. So I call it a fast speech scene. So that's and still the theme. And variation 2, I'll just skip the transition part for time issue. So variation 2 is also speech scene, but it's more articulated. Something like that. So that's variation 2. Variation 3, it's what I call dance scene. So where you have this kind of dance gesture. Something like that. And so you see my left hand is really like dancing, which is not easy. Okay, and the next part is variation 4. I call it the fighting scene. So you only hear that in the video, like when there's a combat fighting scene, the background music sounds like something like that. So, and this is exactly what it sounds like. So something like that with a strong focus on the syncopated rhythm for the left hand. And the next one is variation 5. So variation 5, I call it the climax fighting scene because it has so many different like varied forms of both of the themes. So you have, and then so a lot of things, and it's really like chaotic, this kind of thing. Variation 6 is kind of coming to the end, but with a small climax emotionally. You have this rapid gesture, like, but with the main thing presenting underneath. So like that. So that's about variation 6. Now variation 7 is what I think the most lyrical and really the true climax of the whole piece, where you have this broad gesture chords, added chords, and to present the emotional climax of this. And it goes for 3 pages like that. And so it's all chords and the most shining moment of the piece. So as a conclusion for the form of Beijing opera, it uses variation form with an introduction, 7 variations, and a coda, in which variation 1 and 2 are the speeches, when variation 3 and 6 are the dances, 4 and 5 are fighting scenes, and last one, number 7, is the singing scene to present in the emotional climax of that. So then let's discuss a little bit about the factors that might have been contributed to the choice of form in terms of the geological differences I talked about earlier. So for Zhou, he chooses the 3-part form, and it's an A-B-A prime form with recurring materials, various of dance characters. And for Chen, Mr. Chen, he uses the variation form with 2 themes and varied in 7 different variations. One of the biggest factors I think contributed to this is that when we talk about the art form and the people's life back in the south and north part. So the south part, as I said, they're more civilian people, normal people. So their lives are more free, and their art forms are like mountain folk sounds. It's more casual art. They sing anywhere they could. They just walk on the street and they can sing it. And there's not like a very like a formal notation stuff. They write things down. They just sing it. They sing to their sound. The sound sing to the grandson. So that's how we preserve those folk sounds. Unlike the South, North is controlled by the royal family, where they organized like musicians to compose music, like the Beijing operas. The Beijing operas are firstly developed in Beijing because the emperor liked it. So the emperor likes it, so it kind of develops formally. So as I said, the Beijing opera is a well-composed, more organized art form. And the variation form kind of fit this kind of like condition. So it's variation, you have one thing, one variation, two variation, three, and it's very logic, it is very clear, and it's also easy to follow. Unlike the Mr. Zhou's piece, even though it's in three-part form, but if I don't tell you, it's really tough to tell whether the section has shifted. And plus, it has so many different dance characters. You feel like you're listening to this and suddenly shift to that, so it's more casual. It's more free. And that's, I think it's probably influenced by the people's personality and their living style without control of the royal family. So they do whatever they want. So, and also that's the kind of thing. So that's about the form and the choice of form related to the geographic differences of the two pieces. Okay, the second part, let's talk about the scale. By the way, any questions about the form at this point? Okay, for the scale, to start with, I would use just 1 minute to introduce you, if you're not familiar with the Chinese pentatonic scale. So basically we have 5 notes, right? That's what we call a gong scale, C, D, E, G, E, E. And also we have 2 or 3 or 4, I think 4 alternate notes, but in this case, I will only talk about 2 alternate notes, the bianzhi, which is the sharp fourth, and the biangong, which is the flat 1. So if you add the bianzhi, it sounds like, if I add the biangong, it sounds like, and the reason why we don't have F and B in ancient China is that it doesn't sound good, the tritone. So Chinese people also don't use it like the Western culture back in the medieval times. So when they try to avoid the tritone in the church modes. So we have, just like the church mode, talking about that, we have different modes of different, if you start the notes on different diatonic notes. In pentatonics, we have 5 diatonic notes, C, D, E, G, A. Each of the note could be viewed as a home note to a new scale, just like Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. So they're all diatonic. So we could have gong scale, we could have the shang scale, jiao scale, and jue scale, and finally yu scale. Some of them has a major sounding, some of them has a minor sounding. So as you can perceive that maybe the major scales or the gong scale could be used for something happy, bright, and the yu scale could be for something more melodic and more melancholic, something like that. So, but the reason I talk about this is that different modes, even though they're all coming from one pentatonic scale, the different modes will have different feelings and different moods, just like major and minor scale. The C major feeling is different than D major feeling sometimes. And some people see different colors between C major and D major. So it's the same for different modes in the pentatonic scale system. Okay, knowing about that, now let's go into the pieces. Both pieces, as I said earlier, have combined Western compositional techniques with Chinese traditional musical elements. So for the Zhou piece, it uses the Western like sit class. I will just use sit class because it's more convenient to describe that. But basically, it uses a 4-note group, which I call the tetrachord. And in the Chinese aspect, it uses the U scale, which is starting from A. That's the U scale he uses. So how he uses it? For the 4-note group, like this is the opening gesture where you have. It sounds very, very like the modern. But if you take a closer look at it, it actually use only 2 4-note group, 4 tetrachord. So D, E, E, F. To turn that into set class, it's 0, 1, 3, 6. I'm afraid maybe you're not familiar with this stuff, but basically what I'm talking about is how they related by their half-step relationship. So like D is 3 half steps away from the bottom note, and E is 5 half steps, and F is 6 half steps. That's why I called it 0, 3, 5, 6. And to turn that into a set class, it's 0, 1, 3, 6. And also we have, that's also 0, 1, 3, 6. And if you examine later pieces, a later part in the pieces, it uses the same tetrachord all over the places. For example, the first dance character, that's the dance character number A. So it's the 4 notes, G sharp, B, C sharp, D. That's 0, 1, 3, 6. The next one, the left hand. So A, C, D sharp, it's 1, 0, 1, 3, 6, and D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A. It's also 0, 1, 3, 6. And to be honest, this is not something I discovered. This is the composer who told me. He said I used tetrachord, so go look for it. And then I started to look for groups of 4 notes. And that's how I discovered that, oh yes, it is true. He used tetrachord all over the places. So after that, let's talk about the Chinese aspect of this piece. As I said, he uses a pentatonic scale, which is the U scale. But just like the Western scale system, we could also transpose each of the pentatonic scale. So he has actually used a polytonality or poly scale here in the B section, where he uses the E flat U scale for the girls or for the upper voice. That's the E flat one. And he uses the E U scale for the bottom one. So it's combining together, it sounds like it's quite cool sounding. And the one is on all the black keys and the other is white keys. So this contrasting gestures of the U scale using. Okay, so let's then take a look at the other piece. In Mr. Chen's Beijing opera piece, he also combines both the Western compositional techniques with Chinese traditional elements. So he also uses tetrachord, like 4-note group, but it's a different set. And we'll examine that. But unlike the Zhou piece, he uses gong scale instead of the Yu scale. For 2 reasons. First of all, the gong scale, if you know a little bit about Chinese, like, well, if you know about it. So gong, this word itself means the palace, the authority building. That's gong. So gong scale is mostly frequent. It's mostly frequent used in the royal scenario. So gong scale is the most frequent, also most frequent use for the Beijing opera, because as I mentioned before, Beijing opera was firstly performed just for the emperor. So he chose to use gong scale. But the other thing is that I mentioned that gong scale is a major sounding scale, so it can produce or express this kind of bright, light, broad feeling of the thing. Let's take a closer look at those 2 aspects. All right, so this is the tetrachord he used. So both vertically, horizontally, that's 0, 2, 4, 7, and that's 0, 2, 4, 7. And later when we talk about the harmonic language, that's also related. The vertical is also related to the 0, 2, 4, 7, but we'll save that for later. That's the opening. He uses this tetrachord. And also, by the way, so this is the theme, right? This is it doesn't change throughout the whole piece. Each variation, it's the same thing. So so if you take a look at the further pages, other variations, it all uses the same set class. So that's his use of set class. Now, about scale use. He uses the gong scale, but unlike, okay, so this is, yes, this is the page. So unlike the Mr. Zhou, he uses the gong scale. He doesn't combine two gong scale together, but the thing he added is the fourth note, Bianchi note. Because as I said before, Bianchi, the sharp fourth, is the stylistic note for Beijing opera. And if he, so if you take a look at the example I listed here, maybe if you have the score going from the previous. So this is actually in G gong scale. And we have a C sharp here. So C sharp in the G gong, that's the sharp fourth. And that's the Bianchi note he added. So in terms of the use of gong scale, he uses a gong scale but with the alternate note, sharp fourth, to make it sound more Beijing opera stylistic. Okay, now let's make a little bit of a summary for this part. So both of them, I have combined the Western contemporary scale system with traditional Chinese pentatonic scale. But what's different is that even though they both use tetrachord technique, but Mr. Zhou used the tetrachord of 0136, while Mr. Chen uses the 0247 tetrachord. And the reason for this is that 0247 tetrachord is more pentatonic sounding tetrachord. So pentatonic scale, so he's like, as I said, it's more well composed in the north part, and it's more strictly organized. So he kind of like didn't go too far away from that. Even though he used set class, he put four notes together, but still it has kind of related to the pentatonic scale. Unlike him, Mr. Zhou just goes somewhere else and just find some notes he would like to use, compose the piece. And then they uses different scales, while the Mr. Chen used the gong scale. Mr. Chen used the gong scale with the sharp fourth to make it more sounds like Beijing opera style. And Mr. Zhou used the U scale with a minor sounding to make it more like melodic and lyrical for the normal people's life. So how it got influenced by the cultural differences in between the South and the North. First of all, as I said, the gong scale is the major sounding scale, and it stands for brightness, broadness, and it's used for the palace or the royal families quite often in the North. While the U scale is the minor sounding scale, it's more lyrical and for daily life or emotion expressions. That's why it exists in the South piece. Also, the historical influence is that most of the empires, since most of the empires centered in the North, and the royal music in the North is more popular than the secular music in the South. So we have more like opera, Beijing opera form in the North, more like royal sounding gong scale music in the North. While in the South, it's more like mountain folk sounds, right? As I talked last section. So they sing with melody and more melodic and more nature expressions, as you said that in the South piece, you also imitate the bird singing and things, but these things wouldn't exist in the North part of the Chinese piece. So that's about the use of scale. And now let's shift to the harmonic language. And that's also the last part before the last section. I will talk about three aspects of the harmonic languages they uses. The first one is they both have their own harmonic signature. And the second one is I will examine their chordal structure and their special treatment of chord. So to start with, this harmonic gesture or signature is very obvious in Mr. Zhou's drum tower piece, which is the minor third. Okay, so the minor third is a very, very distinguished and stylistic interval in this piece. So if you take a look at the, sorry, I think I skipped one. Yes. The opening. That's a minor third. And left hand. And then later, it's all section, dance character A, dance character B, and even for that, that's a major 6. It's the inversion of minor third. So it's also minor third. In the B section, it's also minor third. And in the A prime section, and later in the climax, and even for the ending of the piece, this is the very last 2 measures. Do you remember how this piece starts? And then ends with, so it's very kind of like a minor third dominated. Okay, now for the next part is harmonic language. The chordal structure, it uses a lot of open fifth and open fourth and a parallel second in his music like this. So this is kind of that folk song like feeling. It also uses some parallel fourth. So it's even though it's an inverted parallel fifth, but it still sounds different. And the minor or the second, the interval parallel second, it's more like a cluster sounding to imitate those drum sounds. Like that's kind of the drum and the chaotic sound. This sound will loom by the end of the piece. Okay, the next part is about the special treatment of the chord. He applied just a tiny little bit of 12-tone technique in the piece at the end, where he uses all the 12 notes, and he uses, so that's all the 12 notes. He put them together. That's just a very little portion of it, but it is 12-tone technique. Okay, now talking about the other piece. So let me remind you of the instrument I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, the pipa. So pipa, we have 4 tuning strings, which is A, D, E, and A. The set class for this is 0 to 7. And if you still remember the tetrachord he uses, that's 0, 2, 4, 7. So 0, 2, 7 is part of the 0, 2, 4, 7 set class. And we call it 0, 2, 4, 7 is a superset of the 0, 2, 7. This is how they're related. And if you look at this is the very beginning of the piece. You have 4 notes, C sharp, B, A, F sharp, which they form the set class of 0 to 7. Now, the second time when they present this, he added the D sharp. What is that D sharp? Can you make a reasonable guess? What's the most important note in Beijing opera style? Bianzhi, yes. So this is actually in the key of A. Sorry. That's the A gong scale with the D sharp as the Bianzhi note. So he gave out the very stylistic note at the very beginning to say that this is a Beijing opera piece. And what's the rest of the note? That's the tuning for the pipa. Like an orchestra, when you start the opera, players, they're tuning with each other. Okay, that's the interesting part about this. So besides this tuning chord, we also have some added chord. And that's, I think, where he got influenced by Messiaen. He have this open fifth with the added E, and later on, he has all sorts of added chord, like in this later part, he has like a C, F sharp chord with a D sharp, and here he has a G major with A. So he added all sorts of notes there to make it sound more Messiaen-like. Okay, now his special treatment for the chord is the open fifth. Unlike the Zhou piece, he also uses open fifth, right? But this is a totally different feeling. If I play it for you, you'll feel it sounds heavier and it sounds deeper. So it's not like regular Debussy like open fifth parallels. So it has a historical background. I will explain that in just a minute. So as a conclusion, Mr. Zhou's harmonic signature is the minor third for his piece. And Mr. Chen's, not his signature, but he used the signature of Beijing opera as the augmented fourth between the gong note and the sharp fourth. In terms of chordal structure, Mr. Zhou uses more like 2-4-5 chord planning or in parallel motion, and Mr. Chen used a lot of added chord where he learned or influenced by Messiaen, his teacher. And then there's some special treatment of the chord. Mr. Zhou uses small portion of a 12-tone technique, while Mr. Chen uses massive parallel fifth to indicate the royal feeling of the scenes. So just a very brief about how it gets influenced by the geocultural aspects. Well, first of all, the diverse scenario for music performance in the North and in the South. So as I said, like people sing those sounds in the South as a folk sounds, and people perform Beijing opera in the North as a stage art. So the performance scenario is different. For the South part, it's more like natural, simpler, and we use instrument. Actually, we don't use instrument when you sing folk sounds, right? Unless you can play something. So like maybe drums. So those instruments that can be easily played or learned, like little drums, you just play it, or just singing. So it has a lot of that kind of gesture, and that's why he has a lot of like second parallel to create this cluster sounding of drums. While in the North part, it's more sophisticated in the music form and also the instrumentation. So it requires trained musicians to play the instrument like the pipa. So he gives out the pipa tuning chord, and he uses that throughout the piece. And that's a more sophisticated instrument, and that's the influence. And about the parallel fourth versus parallel fifth versus parallel fourth. This is really hard to explain, but for me, when I played it, I just feel it. The parallel fifth in Mr. Chen's piece, it sounds more like more royal. And then the parallel fourth, it's more like a, how would say that? It's really hard to describe, but the fifth is more like a rounded, like the shape of the Forbidden City, while the fourth is a narrower, and where like you see those buildings in the South, it's more beautiful and not that size big. So I have little perception of that, but I'm not sure if it's perceived or not. Okay, and then the building style, as I said, it's beauty versus solemnity. And that's the minor third. Well, that's the point I already made. The minor third versus the open fifth. So one is for the drum tower. The other one is for the Forbidden City. Okay, and that's the major portion of my presentation. And I will save the storyline together with my performance. I will show you some slides going along with my performance. So I don't need to verbally describe what the story is. Everybody can make up their own stories. But just a few words about it. Mr. Zhou's drum tower piece is more like a time-lapse story. So it starts from in the morning when people wakes up, and describe the walking scene in the morning and during the day. And afternoon, there's a love story going on, which is the B section. And then there's a carnival at night, which is really chaotic and very loud sound. You will hear a lot of loud sound for the carnival scene. From Mr. Chen's Beijing opera piece, I think his piece reminded me of one particular person, the last emperor of China in the Qin dynasty, whose name is Pu Yi. He was the emperor for 3 or 4 years, and then the dynasty ended. And he became, first of all, a normal people, a civilian, and then become a prisoner. And then in his late years, he became a civilian and normal people again. So his life shifted dramatically. So the whole music, I think, if you relate it to the music to his life, it will somehow make sense. It's like during the tuning, people tuning chord, it's like when he was born, those huge giant red gates of the Forbidden City opens, And usually when they open they will announce, we have a new baby born. So that's the starting of his life story. And then when he grew up in the Forbidden City and with joy and play for life. But then he realized that his kingdom was over, and he was thrown out of the palace, out of the Forbidden City. So he started to fight with his fate. But of course, he couldn't win because it's the trend of the history. You cannot make a history go backwards. So, but in his final moment, there's a little bit of shining moment of his life where he finally settled down and married a new wife and enjoyed his last years. So that's, and then the later section where in the coda, he has a little bit of memory of his whole life. That's about that. So some final summaries. In terms of the contrast and between the two pieces and the two cultures, first of all, the climate differences has caused the differences between the outdoor dance and the indoor stage opera, which is reflected in the form of the two pieces. And then the geographic barriers of mountains and plains makes various styles in the south and the relatively unified style in the north, and which is the motivic constructions of both pieces. And then the political status, where the royal family settled down in the north, makes the difference between casual beauty versus solemn atmosphere. And this is reflected in the harmonic language. And finally, the historical stories, it's between the celebration of life, as you can see, you can hear from the piece, it's more like celebrated, more happy, versus the memories of the legend. So the emotional expressions is different, these two pieces. Even though there are contrast aspects of the two pieces, there are also connections in between them. They both smoothly insert the Western contemporary compositional technique into traditional Chinese elements like the 12 tone or the added chord. They both demonstrate the great cultural treasure of China, no matter from the south or from the north. Also, they are great compositions to help explore the future of Chinese music with an international presence. So, some final words. The south and the north are separated by the geographic wall of Qing Mountain, causing a significant cultural barrier in ancient China. Even for people 100 years ago, it would take a whole month for them to travel from the south to the north. On December 6, 2017, a high-speed train has successfully crossed the Qing Mountain through the newly built Xi'an-Chengdu high-speed railway. For the first time in the 5,000 years of Chinese history, the north and the south are connected by land within 3.5 hours. The barriers are gone, but the geocultural differences are preserved, and they are now called inclusive cultural diversity. The Southern China culture and the Northern China culture are two tightly related but distinguished elements of modern Chinese culture. They exist as a whole, and that's why I'm presenting you today the two modern Chinese compositions in a pair. They are not just representing how they're different from each other, but leading you to feel the diverse but cohesive modern Chinese culture. Now, let's begin our journey from the south to the north. Please enjoy my performance of the two pieces with the storylines showing in the slides. Okay, that's good. We don't need it. you. So, questions? Yeah, I know. Yeah. Antonio already asked them and listened tons of questions.
The storylines.
Okay.
Are those your personal interpretations of the pieces, or are they officially?
Not for the Mr. Zhou's piece. So Mr. Zhou, as I said, I personally know him, and I discussed this with him already. So that's the story he had in his mind. But for the Beijing opera, this is just the music, the style, the character, and the mood remind me of this particular person. And because he can reflect kind of the last history of the Qing dynasty, it's kind of like from emperor to the end. So his whole life is kind of the reflection of that. So relating, and especially it's a Beijing opera, it's related to Beijing, where the capital is for the Qing dynasty. So it reminded me of that period stories. And also the open fifth. That's because so for me, like I choose this topic also because my parents, my father is from the north and my mom is from the south. So I kind of know the mixture of their differences because they always argue with each other because of the cultural differences. And so I kind of perceive that open fifth gesture in there with the red and yellow colors of the Forbidden City. And so it leads me to that kind of pictures there. And yes, to answer your question, that was my personal imagination. Alex.
Yeah, I have a question. Could you talk about your the learning process of these pieces and how it went with your research into this? Did you research after you had learned these pieces at the same time when you were?
So, okay. So to answer your question, first of all, I learned the two pieces in different times. So the Mr. Zhou piece, I know it for quite a long time already. I know it before I even do research with it. But for the Beijing opera thing, the piece, that's the piece I choose to do the lecture recital project. So I researched it before I learned the piece. And I heard it being played from one of my friends at Indiana. So when I was doing audition there, he was practicing this. I was immediately attracted by this open fifth. I said, what piece is that? And he told me the name, and I started to look at that. Actually, I have this idea at the moment when I got accepted by the DMA program here. So I said, I know I'm going to do a lecture recital. So I already have something in mind there. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this piece. So I did a little bit of research on that. So in terms of the research process or the learning process, it's more like, so for those pieces, it's really, first of all, it's really hard to memorize. And for those chords, and so I just want to know how to compose the chords. So what's the logic behind the melody, behind the chord, rather than just go it? Because by just hearing it, sometimes, especially like for like a modern composition like 12 music, if you just play it, just hear it, it doesn't make sense. You just can't perceive that inner logic behind the notes. You have to really look inside the notes and see what's going on there, and then grab the notes here and there, and just make your own logic to guide you to learn the piece. And that's my process for the Beijing opera thing, the piece. But for the impromptu, I learned it, and then I said, okay, maybe I can combine it to the project. So I started to research on that. Anyone else?
I have another question.
Go ahead.
I've heard a fair amount of music composed by Chinese composers.
Mm-hmm.
Does it always, for you,
Okay.
carry that rich symbolism behind it, when you hear the sounds?
So here's the thing. At least in my experience in playing the Chinese pieces, most of them are strongly problematic. So they are strongly motivated by something they see or they hear. And that's kind of a tradition like in China, Asian China, because music, there's like, well, first we have like religious music, like the Confucius music, but that's not a lot. But for most of the music, it's like poems, like poets. They write poems because they travel somewhere, travel in the mountains, and because they met somebody, they met friends, and they want to express their emotions. So there's always a secondary goal of the music composed. And I don't know about some other, like there are pieces, like do you know the composer Tan Dun? Yeah, Tan Dun, he composed music purely just for music purposes. There's no things like just for like explore the techniques, like Schoenberg doing his the little pieces, and just to explore the 12-tone scale, or like Tan Dun, he speaks for his like a microtone scale, but those music you cannot associate with any of the images or any other things or covers anything like that. But for most of the other pieces I've played or I've heard of, they all have a relation to some other subject. Okay, thank you all for coming, and a special thanks to the three faculty presence